With Andrew Mitchell. I don't know whether you want to say out loud what you just said under your breath, but your response to that?
Well, I think that in this particular project we're looking at, this is an incredibly good deal for the British taxpayer because effectively it's buy one, get one free. War Child have raised the money. The British taxpayer adds £1 to £1, so the British taxpayer is getting effectively £2 of impact in Afghanistan for every pound that the British taxpayer has to produce. That's a good deal, and War Child is an outstandingly good charity. I've seen them in operation in some very difficult parts of the world on the ground, and what they were going to do, exactly as your film has shown, makes a big impact in Afghanistan. It's also to do with modern slavery and child trafficking. That's a key British objective. And after all, NATO is removing itself from Afghanistan. Life in Afghanistan is going to become more risky and more difficult over the coming years and months. And this was a very good way of showing global Britain making a real contribution on the ground there.
Why do you think this argument is proving so difficult to make to the wider public then? And when you listen to Andrew Bridgen, he's not alone, he's not an outsider amongst your colleagues in the party. It's not cutting through. You've been talking about the power of soft power for years.
That is true, and those of us who believe this is the right thing to do because it's not just morally right, it's in Britain's interest, it makes us both more prosperous and safer in the same way that it helps people be more prosperous and safer on the ground in some very difficult parts of the world, and we've got to make that case better. But nevertheless, we all promised, all 650 members of Parliament elected just over a year ago, we promised to stand by the commitment on the 0.7, a promise also made on the floor of the United Nations by the British government, and it is wrong to break it. The 0.7 adjusts for the diminution in our economy, and the government should bring it back as fast as they can.
Andrew Bridgen's feeling duped. He's saying that he was told by David Cameron that all the other countries would rise to the same levels, and actually you saw a graph in Nick's piece saying we're still, I think, the second most generous country there.
Well, look at what is happening now. Britain is chairman of the G7. In the middle of a pandemic, all the other G7 countries are either maintaining or increasing their aid spend. Only Britain is cutting it. The French are going to reach the 0.7 now. The Germans this year will spend more than 0.7, and the Americans are trying to get a budget of $15 billion through Congress. So everyone else, in the heat of a world pandemic, is increasing their aid spending. Britain, which was a development superpower, which led the world, not just financially, intellectually, and tackling poverty, Britain is now leading from the rear.
You speak so passionately, and yet you still have a fight on your hands that you could take to the government. You could get them to change their mind. I think it's estimated you need, what, 44 Conservative MPs to vote with you. You have got an option to force the government's hand to put this through Parliament. Will you do that?
Well, we have urged the government to bring it to the floor of the House of Commons for a vote, and so that the House of Commons can have its say. And it is true to say that a large number of us on the Tory benches are lying in wait for such an opportunity. But in order to do it and to get back the 0.7, you need a specific piece of legislation, and that is quite difficult. We're looking for it. It's quite difficult to find.
Do you have the numbers?
Well, we'll see. You never quite know in the House of Commons, but there are substantial numbers of Conservatives who believe we should stand by the manifesto promise and go back to the 0.7 as swiftly as possible.
Do you think, or do you trust the government now to restore that original commitment? I mean, you've heard two voices, Peter Bone and Andrew Bridgen, who'd be quite happy not to see it go back to 0.7, who think, you know, for the reasons they've just given, that it ought to be substantially less.
I think there's an overwhelming will on the Tory benches of the House of Commons and amongst government ministers too to get back to the 0.7 as swiftly as we can. There's an argument about the public finances. That's perfectly understandable. And the government has been very responsible in the way it's behaved with the public finances throughout this pandemic. But nevertheless, we are talking here of 1%. 1% of the COVID spending over the last year. And I don't think we should balance the books on the backs of the poorest people in the world.
Andrew Mitchell, thank you very much indeed.